Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Architecture of Health. I am Deb Voisin, and this week my guest is Ricky Stanzi. He's the co-founder of Goata Movement and a former professional football player who has a lot to share about our movement blueprint that's regenerative and restorative. Thanks for coming today, Ricky.
Thanks for having me, Deb. I'm really excited for this.
So I always share with the audience how I found you. I have always had a hard time with running. I've always been hypermobile. If I'm doing a movement wrong, it shows up in my body right away. And I just could not get running as much as I spent on the most expensive professionals around the world who are on the cutting edge that are solving problems nobody else could. I still couldn't get at why my kneecap would slide off and I would have this horrible hip pain. But then when I forced myself to sprint every day for 111 days, I finally had seen enough of Ricky's videos and I understood that there was something behind what he was teaching about our ancestral blueprint, that I took his free level 1 class online, and I had such an aha moment to realize that my everyday resting postures and my foot posture were always setting me back. So that's why today we're talking about what you can do that'll help you in terms of recovering your full potential as a human mover. So Ricky, let's start with first of all, what is Goata Movement? And then what was your aha moment that got you headed in this direction?
Yeah, so Goata Movement, so it's an acronym that stands for Greatest of All Time Actions. And what we're doing with that and how we come to those actions is basically taking the world's most durable humans, right? There's 4 tribes that we kind of honed in on, specifically the child developing, the indigenous cultures that are still, as I say, butt naked, barefoot, deep in the Amazon, and the, decade plus super freak athletes that can make it to that decade and still be relatively injury free compared to their peers. And then finally, the 70 plus age group at the track and field world championship. So kind of spanning the life and looking at, okay, who's largely durable? Let's put them into a strainer. Let's see what the common denominators are that are amongst them. Now, those common denominators are what we eventually called the global laws. So these global laws are what we're assessing to. They're what we're training to. It's the main focus of the system. It's really that blueprint that you mentioned earlier. And so for me personally, when I found Goata was about 5-6 years ago. I had, like you said, played football my whole life. So movement was always a part of what I was doing, but understanding movement was one of those things that I had never really thought about. As an athlete, you just kind of do, right? You just go, and when you're young, you're so resilient that you don't think twice. You just act natural, and you work on your skill, and it sort of develops. So I had the privilege of playing college football at Iowa. I had the privilege of getting drafted into the NFL. And right about that time, leaving Iowa 2010, going into the 2011 draft, is when I started to, notice differences in my body. So things that hadn't happened in the past were starting to occur regularly. I had always had trouble with back spasms. So I did have something that was kind of consistent, but I had a way to kind of get myself out of it at times. But now I started to notice new things. Groin pulls, hamstring pulls, knee pain, just more of a chronic daily ailment. And then the biggest thing that kind of pushed me into questioning my own biomechanics was this feeling of a disconnect between brain and body. Hey, I want the ball to go there. My goodness, why is it not? Why am I missing, right? What's the problem here? I want to move faster, or I want to do this and do that. And I felt that there was a disconnect, and it just became a very organic growth for me as far as starting to pursue an amateur education on biomechanics. It started in 2011, and I really spent a full decade from 11 to roughly around 18, right around, a little less than a decade, searching. I would call it a search because I didn't have any results necessarily in that time frame. Besides, as I've shared with you guys in level 1 and level 2, we have this cup, I would say, of preconceived notions. I had a lot of ideas of what I thought, right? Being a quarterback, being a leader, being generally stubborn, I would say. I thought I knew a lot of stuff about movement. As I went through that, journey, personal journey, I was essentially taking and dumping out, bits of this preconceived notion inside my cup. And eventually, at some point in 2017, 2018, I think the cup was empty. And I think at that point, having done enough research, looking east, west, up, down, left, right, I mean, I did it all, right? I was a big weightlifter because that's what you do in football. I couldn't lift weights anymore by about 2016, 2015, 2016. Anytime I would start to ramp up, my back would go out. I'd get really bad shoulder pain, a lot of AC joint issues. I had to stop, not because I wanted to, but because the body was kind of asking me to. Went into more of an Eastern movement type of basis, which, yoga, Pilates, I wouldn't say is maybe Eastern, but kind of gets lumped into that world. And that started to put me into asking more questions about what's natural. And through sheer luck, or maybe, divine intervention, if you will, something being placed in front of me, I came across a book called Muscles and Meridians, which, Deb, I've shared that so many times with you guys in level 1 and level 2. It's a book by Philip Beach. And I would say it is the piece, the domino that got me really rolling. And it was a very dense book from a almost cadaver science template, right? A lot of big words, a lot of big concepts that were being fleshed out, but also some very simple high-level overviews, macro views, satellite view of the human body. And a couple of those things were, okay, there's a design. He goes through the embryological perspective of the human body, looking at it as almost, on a factory line. Like it has an order of events. There's a certain sewing to the musculoskeletal system. And the way that we keep that organization, or that natural harmony that's sort of developed in the embryo, the way that we keep it maintenance, because his big thing is any complex system, organic or inorganic, needs a security and self-tuning sort of mechanism. And the way that he kind of goes about that is looking at rest. So he looks at, hey, all terrestrial animals are really resting on the ground in their natural setting. So, looking at quadrupeds, the big cat, the wolf, whatever it may be, there's a rest on the ground. Look at us humans. We've removed that from our movement vocabulary. Right now we're in a table, in a chair, not to mention shoes. That's a whole nother podcast in and of itself. But he basically proposes the human body was meant to rest on the ground. And he shows you these natural postures, and you start thinking, and you're like, well, yeah, I mean, nobody teaches us these things, but we all do them as kids. We get away from them probably first, second grade, right? And then he talked a lot about indigenous cultures and how they're still doing these postures and they're not breaking down. And so that there, along with in the book, him mentioning spinal engine, which then kind of pushed another door open. So now I go to look at spinal engine, and coming from the world of weightlifting, it was always brace your core, stop movement, stop movement. Spinal engine's like, wait a second, facet joints, Friet's laws, movements, a part of what keeps them healthy. So now that opens a door to, I'm thinking about design. I'm thinking about rights and wrongs. I'm thinking about resting patterns. I'm thinking about spinal engine. And now I start to, luckily for me, I was never really into social media as an athlete. Didn't want to have any, didn't want to do anything dumb, basically, right? You know how they do it. They stay off social media for athletes. So I join it as now a movement coach, or aspiring movement coach at the time, when I was sort of retiring from football, but basically, they don't want you anymore. So you got to get a second career. Eventually they fire you enough. You're like, all right, I'll try something different. So now I know I want to coach movement. Like, I'm obsessed with it at this point. I've spent almost a decade all day, every day, just reading as much as I can get my hands on, looking as much as I can get my hands on. And now I come across this system called Goata. And at the time, the two people there that were kind of running the ship, Coach Gary, who's still there with me, and then Coach Gilly, Jose Bosch, who was really the first person to look at and develop and ask some of these questions that we brought to the forefront here at the beginning, but also had the concept of, well, what do the durable people do? Why don't we just copy that? But then also the sort of speed up of technology to that point had brought us the iPad. It had brought us, obviously, the iPhone. What's cool about that, and what's an integral part of the Goata system, and what really spoke to me, not only with the spinal engine or them talking about, nature and then highlighting the indigenous, which really resonated with me since I had read Philip Beach's book. The other piece was slow motion evidence, okay? Going frame by frame with this new technology that's in your pocket, it's in your backpack. Before that, like Gilly would say, it was CBS, NBC. Yeah, you turn on a Sunday night football game, they can slow down frame by frame, but you don't have that technology in your hand. And as a quarterback, I mean, I've spent since 8th grade going over tape, right? We watch tape as football players frame by frame. So I was like, okay, well, I've learned the X's and O's of football frame by frame. This makes so much sense. Let's learn the X's and O's of movement frame by frame. Like, these guys are asking great questions. Gilly was somebody who was on the outside of the industry. He was a true disruptor. He is a self-made millionaire in another realm. So he was just asking questions, could care less if it worked or didn't. He just wanted to fix his own body. But they were the first group of guys that I was conversing with around movement that were not saying, do as I say. They were saying, here's where you need to look. And I love that. So they challenged me. Here's where to look. Here's the questions to ask. And that was the piece. And once I remember having a discussion with Gary and Gilly, and they were talking about this inner ankle bone high versus inner ankle bone low, right? The shaping of the foot. Basically, the foot's supposed to be a half dome arch, right? Think of the arch support in shoes, the shape of it. Think of orthotics, kind of what they're trying to get in a generalized way. One cohesive shape of the foot. And that's what we teach at Goata. But there's got to be a counteract to that, right? So understanding good is only possible if we understand bad. So there's a definite binary and duality to the world as you look around, right? It's common sense. How do you know what left is? Well, you have a framing reference point with what right is. So knowing both gives you the bigger picture, right? The spectrum. So when Gilly's posing these questions for me, he's like, I want you to go look at, and this was the moment where I was like, all right, I can't go back now. I remember one night he's like, I need you to go look at on YouTube, grab a bunch of ACL tears, a bunch of Achilles tears, go put them in this slow motion app. I just want you to watch them. Okay. Then he's like, I want you to go watch and think about heavy back squats, heavy deadlifts, Olympic lifts. Go watch some of those. Go watch the Olympics. Go watch them. Tell me what you see. And I come back the next day. I'm like, it's the exact same foot pattern. He's like, exactly. He's like, so we are training ourselves to collapse at the foot, which is going to provide a host of other issues. And there was just so many, as I've kind of set up these different almost boats that we can kind of travel in to go to the same island of Goata. That was what was just really like expanding my mind, was there were so many different ways, so many different micro details around this macro concept.
Yes.
And Gilly basically saying there's natural movement and there's process, and we're accidentally living in a processed movement environment. Here's a new blueprint. This is the natural way, which is Goata, the greatest of all time actions, boiled down to those global laws.
I'm going to hop in here because that's what I've seen as someone with a background in design research and as an amateur biomechanics person now. I'm probably going on, I don't know, I started a long time ago culturally, but as far as the tissue and the bones and spinal engine and all that, it's been about 5 years. And what's unique to me about Goata is the distillation. Like it's so overwhelming when we have to start learning about biotensegrity, and then we have to learn joint centration, and even these are so different, divergent from what's been the mainstream cadaver view of the body. Only getting that aha moment, like when I had hired Frey Faust to co-produce this book with me. He, like Gilly, was an outsider in the dance world, and he was like, well, this is why you're all getting the same labrum tears in your hips. And his was more designed around the hips, but the foot and the hip can't be separated. And
of course,
and yet I couldn't take from that this extremely detailed knowledge of the body. I couldn't extract out like what are like 3 things I could do every day that are going to get me there. Yeah. But from the Go Clay method, I learned there's a way I could orient myself in a chair. There are ways I can orient myself as I bend, but still that wasn't solving the problem of this robust dynamic, being able to go to another ancestral marker, which is our ancestors could run 500 miles over a couple of days barefoot, and yet I couldn't even jog. Like
Right.
so learning about how we've been trapped in these ideas, whether it's a PT who's got a linear model of the body while we don't have a single straight surface
Right.
here, whether it's that they've been looking at dead tissue instead of living tissue. And this is a very exciting time with the internet. Like you said, slow motion, people all around the world being able, and yet we are more injured than ever. The number, as we talked the other day, we've had a 200% increase in the amount of orthopedic surgeries for people under 60. And yet, at the same time, our activity level has gone up. And a lot of it is a lot of the things that are the best intention movements, even yoga or stretching or weightlifting,
Sure.
when you even moving the arm in a straight arc like this starts to gently tease the bones of the hinge joint here apart. And so because we're polyaxial multiplanar movers, and yet that's so hard to grok, it's so hard to teach. And that's what's so
Yeah.
beautiful about Goata, the global laws simplifying, getting a manageable movement hygiene. And that's one thing that you've talked about a lot. If we're going to eat processed food, and we're living on chairs, we're driving cars, we have thick shoes. If we're going to eat processed movement, we have to have that's why we brush our teeth. Indigenous people didn't necessarily brush their teeth, but they didn't eat any refined greens and sugars either. So what I love the most about Goata is you carefully spoon-fed this change. Because I've also seen people get so self-hating. Oh, I'm primal. I got rid of all my shoes. And then they're a mess because their arches collapsed more. Their tail tucked more because they're sitting on the floor suddenly and they weren't prepared. So that's part of, and that's one thing I think people misunderstand about Feldenkrais. It's all like, no movement is bad movement. It's only movement you weren't prepared for. I disagree. I think there is expensive movement that costs soft tissue damage. Maybe not today while you're training all the time, but give you 10 more years, 20 more years. But the beauty of what he was saying there was preparation is important. And this shift being looking at the 50-year, the 10-year, the 5-year. It's not about getting more a cortisol pump today so that you look hot, So let's go start with then what tell us a little bit more about restoring these springs. I know I hadn't understood before how important the feet are. And I see so many fitness things ignoring the feet completely or doing this limited local foot strength thing when we're not really loading the foot properly so that all the muscles and the tendons and ligaments can collaborate. What would you like to say about how Goata starts at the feet?
Yeah, I think it's obviously number one in our system. Like I've kind of laid out at the beginning here, we definitely need the macro viewpoint to start, but it doesn't mean, right? So picture it, we can have the satellite view, but it doesn't mean we don't have microscopes as well. But we want both. So we want to be able to dive into the details, but we can only have details surrounding a higher arching concept. So while we're looking at the body in, as you mentioned, not from a linear standpoint, but from an integrated standpoint, and that's the commonality amongst the system. So as we lay out in our level one, we have cataloged, diagnosed, and treated the musculoskeletal system just like we've actually diagnosed, cataloged, and treated the other systems of the body. So when you look at the cardiovascular system, for instance, okay, it's integrated. That's immediate to someone's mind. If I say cardiovascular system, people picture not just the heart, but they see it, the whole roadmap working through the whole body. Furthermore, you associate a cycle to the cardiovascular system, all right? And inside of that cycle, there's phases, and there's something being moved through that cycle. Now, when you look at other systems of the body, this is ground zero, number one, to the health and longevity of that system. Systems are what we just said, a system. They're not cardiovascular parts. It's not respiratory parts. It's a system. So Each system will be integrated. It will be moving in a cycle, and it will be moving something in that cycle. So the cardiovascular has the blood, right? The respiratory has the air. The digestive has the food. We can go on and so forth. You get to musculoskeletal, we say system, they'll talk like that, but then they're actually treating it. They're cataloging, diagnosing, and treating it as musculoskeletal parts. To prove this, bicep, glute, hammy, groin, calf, flexion, extension. I can go on, right? So where I think things went wrong is, one, blood's very easy to see, right? We can actually see this. You could touch it. Okay. So it's you can't have the cardiovascular without the blood. You would be remiss to try to study it outside of the blood moving through it. That's a key part of it. Digestive has the food. Respiratory has the air, right? You can see the lungs expand away from the midline. You can see the lungs close and interact with that air. Well, the musculoskeletal is a little bit trickier. And this is where the slow motion video becomes so important, because if we think musculoskeletal, you're probably listening to me right now and going, well, what's the thing that the musculoskeletal moves? The thing is pressure. So pressure, right? Your body weight, sort of load, is going to be placed on the bones. It's going to be placed on the structure. Now, this is almost an invisible force in a sense to the naked eye. But if I have a iPad, or if I have slow motion frame by frame technology, I can watch as the compartments, mainly the foot, and then as I go upstream, the shin, thigh, torso, I can watch those compartments form around that pressure, and I can see that pressure load and transfer. And then you start to ask yourself, okay, well, what's the cycle of the musculoskeletal system? Well, think about cardiovascular, pumping the blood thousands of times, digestive, thousands of reps, respiratory, thousands of reps. So you have to simply ask, well, what's the musculoskeletal system do thousands of times a day? What is like so crucial to it that if you didn't have it, it would almost be as if the system was dead? I would argue it's the gait cycle. Simply put, point A to point B. Without that, you're a vegetable. You need help from the people around you.
To break in gait, for those who don't run in this life yet, gait, walk or run, gait cycle. And I would add, Ricky, that's one of the reasons some of these other methods could actually detrain. They could these movements that are in the gait cycle, like you alluded to, are, it's a spiral managing, all organisms on Earth are arranged around gravitational forces and the flow of fluids. And none of those are straight lines. Right. They're all either some kind vortex. Of spiral, a vortex. And that's one reason I have my golden spiral on here. And yet we're doing these isolated, separating things. So, one thing that I had never seen, I've been really looking at head over foot. I've been looking at the spinal engine. I've been looking for years, so hard. And what you pointed out so gracefully to me is, I knew there were these cycles of loading and unloading, but I didn't understand it's got a consistent quality. It's got a harmony of the turn of the body all the way from the foot down, out through my gaze. And a gait cycle, we're doing these tiny movements. The hips and the shoulders and the head, they're doing these tiny movements thousands of times a day. And audience, just go watch someone walk and you'll see most people, their heads are hardly moving. This is a symptom of a sick being, because our head is in the middle when we're still. It's the weight of our head is expression of the overall management of this free, this healthy pressure management. If you think of like a fire hose, when it gets a kink in it, it's going to be explosive. Something bad is going to happen. But when we have this pressure that goes all the way through our system, then we get was kind of the divine aspect of it. We get the free ride. We get gravity. We get the freedom. We get effortless athleticism. And I'm not there yet. I'm giving myself till 60, 3 more years to really get my run locked down. So and that was one thing, this system is emphasizing harmony, not struggle, emphasizing groundedness, not battle. Absolutely. And yet it makes us very strong. So great.
Yes.
I would love for you to talk specifically, because the foot being deprioritized outside of the dance world.
Right.
I never, even after I did in Go Clay Method, we taught some kidney bean feet thing, but it wasn't. And then
Yeah.
Frey Faust is definitely a genius about the foot. He hand makes all of his own shoes because his feet got so wide. Yeah, he's a genius. But I wanted to say what I never saw was when you talk about inside ankle bone high, it's
Hmm.
this angle of the heel. And when you get that angle, then the ankles unlock and I can go down with a little support with these Goata chucks. Even
Yep.
though I'm not all the way there, they get the turn of my foot just so that my jammed ankle bones can spiral
Hmm.
just enough that I can suddenly sit in a comfortable resting squat. So I want you to talk a little bit more because people around me tearing their Achilles and having this
Sure.
dissociation of the feet. I would love for you to explain that why that tension starting with the inside ankle bone high with the heel with the Achilles, why that and how does that work?
Yeah, and it's spot on with that concept of pressure because now the foot being really the only thing ultimately when we work through the child development of all fours to a single leg, eventually, as you go about this gait cycle, so we mentioned point A to point B, okay, well, that is your walk, but if you turn it up like a song on the radio or like a light dimmer, that's a light that's dim or a light that's bright, it's still on. Think of your cycle of movement similar, right? So the walk is the jog, is the run, cut, juke, jump, throw, swing, and strike. And while you're doing that, similar to how I could write books and go to school for the cardiovascular for 6 years, I could also simply say the cardiovascular pumps blood. So I could boil it down to a very simple way and then expand on the details of that. With the musculoskeletal, we'd say the same thing. We would say the musculoskeletal pumps pressure. Now, why the foot becomes a number one as well, it's the filter for that pressure. So if you've got problems at the foot, it obviously makes sense that the shin compartment, it's not going to translate well there. The thigh compartment, it's not going to translate well there. Just notice how disorganization at the foot, the foundation, leads to issues upstream, right? We would see this in engineering or architecture of other kinds that are inorganic, like a house. If you got a foundational problem with your house, it's going to create issues upstream. So the foot becomes a number one. And I'm going to share my screen just so the viewers that want to look at this can get a better idea. But I'll try my best to explain with words. I'm always looking to improve, so I'll get a little bit of rep here. But the idea is to boil this down in a simple way. Let's use something that we're all familiar with. Okay, let's frame this from a philosophical standpoint, a joystick. All right, so this idea of a joystick. All right, now simply put, a joystick, let's look at it as two parts. There's a platform, all right, something that holds still. Okay, if you're maybe a little bit older, you're picturing the arcade where the joystick is sitting in the actual big machine, but nonetheless, the big machine doesn't move. Well, it's nice and stable so that the joystick can create the movement. And if you're a little bit younger, you picture the controllers of a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox. But simply put, there is stability or non-movement so that we can create the articulation through the joystick. So simply put, let's look at the foot as the platform, the thing that's going to hold and stabilize and not move so that we can then move what we're considering to be, air quotes, the joystick, which is going to be the limbs and the torso. So now the limbs and the torso, as we'll say, we talked a little bit about the torso being a facet joint, spinal engine. Simply put, you live in a three-dimensional environment. The ball and sockets, the limbs and the torso have to operate on 3 dimensions. They cannot operate on 1. They cannot operate on just 2. They have to interact on all 3 planes simultaneously. This is where Fibonacci, the spiral, God's signature of a curvature, vortex, is littered everywhere in nature because it has to be. There's certain laws to it. So if I take 3 planes, I combine them simultaneously, I now get this spiral movement. Now, if you look at the shin compartment, and this is the one that always trips everybody up because we consider it to be a ball and socket. And the reason for that is I look at these pieces kind of separated for a second. I want you to look at this piece up here. This is the talus. All right. So the talus has a lot of similarities to the other ball and sockets, mainly the hip, obviously, and the shoulder. It has a face. Okay. It's got a smooth surface face. It has a neck. So it's got a little bit of space where it kind of skinnies out before it expands back out into sort of the body. All right. And it also has the navicular bone, which is kind of a way of looking at it as the pelvis of the foot, right? Something that's going to glide and slide against. So now as I look at the hip, I can draw similarities. There's a smooth, curved face. It skinnies out for the neck. And then it has the body, which is what we call the femur bone. But then it has the pelvis that gives it a nice wall, almost like, you know, a skateboard ramp where you can kind of slide and glide the wheels against it. So we're looking at the shin compartment and the thigh compartment as ball and sockets, right? The knee becomes this hinge or a meeting spot in between. And if you just take a step back for a second and think about what's been fed to us at the foot and ankle level, right? First off, they'll tell you that the foot has multiple arches, and then they'll tell you that the ankle is a hinge. Well, if you're going to accept that the hip is a ball and socket, which nobody will argue that, and the knee is a hinge, which really nobody argues that, there's slight, like you said, there's always a little bit of curvature, but largely put, comparative to a ball and socket, it's very hinge-like.
Yeah.
That makes the shin have to play as a ball and socket. So the shin compartment and the thigh compartment, if they're not on the same page, well, that's like tearing a chicken bone. You can't have them going in different directions. You'll tear your knee on every step. To give you a little bit of an analogy that usually hits home for most people, let's look at the vacuum cleaner, right? So picture the vacuum cleaner of the 70s, 80s, even probably the 90s. It was linear, right? So when you were vacuum cleaning in your house, everything had to be a straight line. You had to go forward and back in straight lines, forward and back in straight lines. Made it tough to turn. You really couldn't, right? It was linear. So this guy Dyson comes around, right? Maybe that's his name, maybe it's not, I don't know. But the point is, he puts a little gyroscope at the neck of the vacuum cleaner, and it completely revolutionizes how people use the vacuum, because now you've limited time and you can curve the vacuum because it has the ability to turn. So all we're saying is that if you look at movement and you appreciate this ability to move, you understand that turning is such a crucial part to movement. Well, if your ankle's a hinge, you're a robot, you can't turn.
Ricky,
Furthermore,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I want to go summarize something there, which is you're the one, you know, the body has these alternating areas. Something is a fairly free moving ball and socket. And then there's stability, then there's freedom, then there's stability.
Right.
It's the same alternating. Our design alternates this way so that we are in harmonious and free at the same time. And what's happening, I believe, is our insurance system requires a diagnosis. The diagnosis requires zooming in on a part so that the therapist can work on that specific part. But the fact that if you have this foot that's not supposed to be a hinge, but some of the skeletons have the bolt in there so that works as a hinge. But if we can see that the ankle is supposed to be, the foot can be intact and move freely, as you said, from the joystick of the shin. Then if that's not happening, and it's not in 99% of 95% of sedentary people, and then the hip ball joint isn't going to work properly, and then the one that gets yanked is what's supposed to be the most married up is the knee, and it starts to, like you said, get torn a little bit with every step. So keep going,
No, and to kind of piggyback off that, because you brought up a really good point there about this idea of like mobility, stability, mobility, and we can really start at the toes. So for a second, because if you're looking at me here, or if you've got your hand out, which most of us can kind of use our hand to kind of look at our foot in the same way, as above, so below type of stuff. So picture your palm as the ball of the foot or the arch, of our foot in this analogy. And then picture my fingers, all right, that finger line where the finger now meets the palm, and then obviously my fingers are going to represent the toes. So what I want you to see is that the foot offers us mobility through the toes and then stability through the arch. So really the arch starts at the metatarsals and then works its way back to this bone we call the cuboid. All right. So if we kind of drew a line from the toes meeting the ball of the foot, right, as that like line, the toe line, we draw that line. So we're including the metatarsals and all the way to the cuboid as sort of this arch of the foot. This allows us to bend at the toes, which creates some articulation, allows you to do things like a toe tuck. It allows you to literally go from standing to floor rest, which is obviously a big part of human movement. So you're afforded mobility at the toes so that you can have stability through the arch, which then allows you mobility at the ankle. And like we said, the ankle is going to play like this joystick. So it has this ability to sort of open and close. And if we want to take a look at another piece of evidence, we can go and we can look at, first and foremost, as it was proposed by Philip Beach in Muscles and Meridians, he shows you the embryological perspective. So what I'm showing right now on the screen for our listeners is I'm showing a couple pages from his book, which I guys got to recommend it because if anybody wants to nerd out on biomechanics,
it's deep.
It's great.
I read
it's deep.
dense but so paradigm shifting.
Yes. So what I'm showing right now is like early stages embryological development. Literally day 28 is how he's got it marked out here. This is what's so cool about this chapter is he just takes you through this thing and you can read it a million times and you'll find something new each time. But what you'll see on the screen is basically just the torso. So like a very like almost Play-Doh-like torso shaped human being and it's day 28 legitimate infancy. And I'm going to go to another picture here, which is going to start to show you the limb buds kind of working out from the torso. So this is the whole thing with spinal engine. I think where people do get spinal engine wrong is they like want to battle between limbs or torso. Guys, it's all the same stuff. The limbs are the executive organs of the torso, right? They carry out the torso and the spine's commands. So what he's showing you is that the limbs are the torso, the same tissue. It kind of spirals out quite literally. So much so that your lower limb is spiraled inward, your upper limb spirals outward. And this is limb bud rotation. So the elbow and knee face laterally at day 50. Over the next 10 days, the upper limb is said to externally rotate, the lower limb internally rotates, so the elbow and knee can come to approximate each other. And then he has this awesome sentence here, which as I looked back on it, after Goata, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's speaking Goata. But if he had slow motion video, he could really go to the actual details. And what he says is, with the limb bud development, this pattern is modified. Okay, the hind limb, so your lower limb musculature becomes coiled. Muscle that was at the back of the limb bud migrates to the front of the developing leg. And to simplify, in effect, the leg musculature acts like a pogo stick, coiling and uncoiling in our gait pattern. So this is why we say, okay, we've got the musculoskeletal system, or let's say the cardiovascular system, to go back to those analogies. The cardiovascular system is going to pump blood, all right? The musculoskeletal system is going to pump pressure. Now, stay with me here for a second. If you look at pressure, okay, and you look at how it interacts with systems. So when it moves into a system, picture a balloon for a second blowing up. When the pressure moves into the balloon, what do you see? Expansion, right? It moves outward. When the air moves out of the balloon, what does it do? It closes back inward. Okay, now let's take a look at the lungs. Air moves into the lungs. What do you have? Expansion away from the midline. The air moves out, contraction back towards the midline. Okay, let's look at the heart. Blood pumps in, the heart expands, blood pumps out, heart closes. Okay, let's look at digestive. Digestive opens, digestive closes. What we're saying with the musculoskeletal is the exact same high-level overview of expansion or sort of outward, inward is taking place, but now it's taking place through this different medium, which is these joint capsules or these limbs and torso. So you've got the lower limb, the torso, and the upper limb all available to work in a three-dimensional setting. As we look at the musculature, as Philip Beach points out, it's all spiraled. If you want to zoom into a specific area, look no further than the Achilles tendon. And what the research on the Achilles tendon has shown is that, yes, this is also spiraled inward. So the foot is the arch so that the Achilles can be the spring. If the arch collapses, the Achilles spring ceases to function the way it was designed. So an Achilles tendon is sewn on an inward spiral, meaning that you need to turn it outward, just like the heart's going to open away outward from the midline as pressure enters in. So every single step that you take, your leg, and I'm going to bring up a video real quick so you guys can actually see this pressure wave take place in real time. Every single step in your day, and I'll show you a sprint so that it kind of jumps off the page at you. Every single step in your day is going to go through this expanding outward and then contracting back inward. So expanding outward. So we have this athlete on the screen right now. And what you see as you look at his leg is a curvature, right? Because the thigh bone and the shin bone are expanding outward from the midline in a multiplanar spiral-like manner, because that's consistent with the laws of the space that we're hanging out in, right? Our environment. And we call it a bow. So there's an outward expansion with your pressure loading in the column. And then there's an inward spiral as you go to transfer. And if you want to allow the out to in to happen, well, you've got to maintain that half dome arch structure that we talked about. You have to be inner ankle bone high to allow outward to inward expansion.
I would love to pause here.
In.
Stay here. I did not get inside ankle bone high. You guys are saying it over and over and over.
Yeah.
And it's once I finally, and I had heard the research from someone I knew who's a PhD in physiology, the research they quoted about how, supinated feet have this many running injuries and pronated feet have this many running injuries. And supinated is a shorthand for the high arch, but those are binary ideas that are not multi-planar, or as axillologists would say, polyaxial. That's the ankle being married to the shin and the foot flopping all the way in or flopping all the way out without this dynamic coiling and uncoiling. And that's what I learned from you guys, was I needed to keep the pressure across the ball of the foot so that the arch that my foot has really could keep that pressure with, keep that open. Oh yeah, whatever.
Yeah, you want?
I want that thing back. Yeah. And that from there, the knee could spiral in or spiral out. And instead of the whole foot slides this way, the whole foot slides that way, and I get injured.
Sure.
So this, and what Goata has is a thoughtful process for how do you first start to see this, and then how do you slowly take this glob together crazy glue fascia that is, and this sticky scar tissue, how do you really start to change? And this idea that it's not just a high arch and it's not just a low arch, it is a springy foot that then has a heel angled such that the Achilles can be wrapping in a way that it's less likely to tear. And then we can also get the 20 times recoil potential our ancestors had, so that running was effortless. But the other thing, can you go back to that picture of the guy running, or a static one?
Yes. This one right here?
Yeah.
You want the video?
Yeah, like there, like even there. Oh yeah, a little further in, just show him when he's, say, landing on his leg. Okay, there. You'll see it's a whole body event. His head is over this, his head is flowing, like the spinal engine is modestly flowing between the supports. So he's not jarring. He's not just jamming into his legs. He's got this whole body flow.
You have to accept pressure.
Accept pressure. And what a lot of yogis and dancers, which are most of my friends, we've been overtraining some of this receive, and not enough of this push, not enough of, what do you call
transfer, acceleration. Yep.
Or even practicing a flat art, like stretching or looking at a mirror, when you're not getting the locomotion as one of your main imperatives as a human being to age well. Like you said in the beginning, someone has to carry you around and wipe your ass when you fall down.
You're a vegetable.
You're a vegetable. And this one last thing is when your head knows how to, your whole spine knows how to effortlessly coil into one side, you can effortlessly go down to the ground on one side. You can effortlessly
Yes.
pick things up. You can do African dance like a mofo. Okay, Ricky.
Yes.
So let's go into your solutions to this problem.
Yes.
Let's go into that. And maybe we stop screen share. I don't know, unless there's any
Sure.
other made. Oh, and toddlers. Oh wait, do you have one of the baby showing that this is inherent where you had the
Yes. 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 We've got a lot of the crawl, right? So we're talking about, and this is probably a good way to look at all of it together.
yeah.
You're looking at the far left is literally seconds after birth going into water and seeing that the pattern, right? So that coiling pattern in the body is present immediately. And if you want to look at this work, there is a lady called Marianne. Her name is Marianne Barbu Roth. Okay. And what she did was she studied the moments post birth where they lay the baby on the mother's stomach and it starts to go gravitate, obviously, towards its first feeding session. So her thought was, okay, much like an astronaut coming back from space, right? There's a sort of readjustment period for the baby as it comes out of the womb in a liquid state. Okay, so it's weightless in there. So you feel the baby kicking and moving and going crazy. Ask any lady that's had a baby, right? They know the baby can move. It's not unable to move in the womb, but it comes out of the womb and all of a sudden it feels like it's not, able to really move itself for 6 to maybe 7 months. Well, like an astronaut coming back from space, the baby is adjusting to gravity. The baby's head is a little too heavy for it to kind of hold up. So it goes through this developmental progress, but much like a car that's in the auto shop, getting sort of the detailing of maybe the paint job and getting a new windshield and getting all this other framework done, but the engine's still good. It's not being worked on. The engine can still rev. It's just up in the body shop and the outside stuff is getting worked on. So what she said is this crawling pattern is always there. It just can get further developed after the baby gets a little bit stronger. So she actually is on a Netflix documentary called Babies. It's like a multi-part series. She's like episode 3 crawling, but she shows that like, okay, there's a pattern and she does some really cool sort of like experiments, right? So she does this one experiment where she sort of puts a baby on a skateboard and she shows that given the accounting for the baby's weight of its head, the pattern of out to in, and as you're watching the screen, you can see this skateboard swivel inward as the baby transfers off of, and we mentioned the toes being mobile. Look at the toes being mobilized here, but the arch of the foot remains intact. So there's this opening and closing action to the cycle that, well, it takes place all the way through our developing years. This is actually my son, Mickey, going through it where he's moving that out to in type of twist. Look at him coiling up just like we saw.
The same way.
Exactly the same, and uncoiling. And then this is the one that'll really blow your mind. You got a Paralympics swimmer that's in the, sort of a liquid state of the water, obviously. And you can see the leg, just one leg kind of really lets our eyes hone in. Watch how the thigh bone and shin bone open up, creating that outward expansion, getting ready to load. And then boom, transfer back inward to accelerate and move forward through space. So the idea is that it's always there, okay? But because we're living in a state of constant, afference where information's coming in and going out. So every input has the ability to change us, right? There's sort of like a microevolution happening on where, like Chinese foot binding, well, if you start using your body differently than what it was designed, which, well, look at the shoes, look at the tables and the chairs. If we're off our mark in our everyday movement, well, guess what? It's going to affect change in the way that we're organizing the body, which kind of gently leads into how do we fix it, right? Well, what do we do differently? How do we go about that?
And baby
and so if you
steps,
want me to, I can talk about that.
Yeah,
go next.
And I just want to, the beautiful thing here is that it's already here. It's already in us. It's a matter more like Michelangelo removing the unneeded parts.
Yes,
And
that's a
yes,
beautiful analogy.
full acceptance that every, like you just said, we are the net sum of all these inputs.
Yes.
We have exactly, we need to be grateful that our beautiful bodies have perfectly adapted to living
Mm-hmm.
in a chair-based culture, with feet that are bound,
Mm-hmm.
somewhat like the Chinese foot binding. I just have to say this: when I used to teach the Go method, we would talk about, Chinese foot binding is a symptom that you can uh, uh, kind of worship disease. That they
Yeah,
bind the feet and bind the feet as a way to
sure.
express that their status is so high that they don't need to walk, and you can make damaging things trendy, sexy, an indicator
Of
of
course.
status. So what I love that we're talking about is a returning to our ancestral, our divine right to feel
Mm-hmm.
good as we age and not get this separation from the earth,
Mm-hmm.
not bind our feet, to reclaim that wildness that's free and feels good. So yeah, how do we start? Because then it gets also sort of daunting. Like even you and I, we're probably sitting on the floor. I had to do a lot of
Yes.
things to make this possible. I had to get a squishier rug. I had to move
Oh,
my
yeah.
couch. I had to find a chair to put my computer on. I still have to do certain things before and after so that I'm not doing it
Of course.
horribly. So, but you're the expert here. What kind of where would you think most people can start?
Yeah. And the first thing I would say is it's not going to be easy, right? But there is a certain roadmap that you can take. And the toughest part is the first part, right? Like any other, new exercise routine that you adopt, right? You wake up the next day and you've got the DOMS, you've got that muscle soreness, right? You've worked out areas of the body that you haven't touched before, right? You kind of been just hanging out and all of a sudden you go to Planet Fitness or Orange Theory and you do a high intensity interval workout. And the next day you're like, oh my gosh, every single muscle is aching. So when we go to change our current state, we should expect some, I wouldn't say discomfort, but we should expect some soreness, right? Some new sensations because you're waking up some dormant tissue, right? You're fighting that rust in that crazy glue that's kind of been bottled up into your joint capsules and you're starting to get rid of it. And what we do at Goata that's slightly different is we want to get you out of this sort of framing of exercise as the only way to get your movement that's healthy. I think that's just been something that we've accepted, like, oh, you want to get better at movement, or you want to take care of yourself, well, you got to go to this gym and you got to put together this hour workout, you got to buy these shoes and this dry fit and take this supplement. It's completely been detached from lifestyle of movement, right? There's no vantage point of, okay, yeah, I go to a gym for maybe 10% of my day, if that, just being generous. What about the other 90% of my day? Wouldn't those inputs matter if every input of the day is going to eventually lead to behavior? So where Goata hangs its hat is, let's talk about lifestyle. So we call them the pre-movement fundamentals. So as we laid out, the gait cycle is number one. First and foremost, as you mentioned, having this birthright to longevity, think about what the system's already telling you, right? Every other system has to do their thing. Okay, you got to pump blood thousands of times. You got to eat thousands of times, breathe thousands of times. Well, you got to walk literally thousands of times a day. Extrapolate that over a lifetime. You believe in God and you believe in creation. You really think He would make you use the system 1,000 times a day, whatever that equals over a lifetime, and it's going to break down when you're 30? That's very cruel. I don't believe that. So it's implying that there is a marathon to life, that it has to be built for longevity to even withstand thousands of reps in a 24-hour cycle. Imagine that over a lifetime. So as we look at movement, and what we've done with movement is say, all right, what's that point A to point B? Okay, well, it's this pressure wave. I load pressure, I transfer pressure. So the markings of a good pressure wave actually show up in your pre-movement fundamentals. And this is the genius of Gilly and Gary as they were first developing the system and the assessment process. Is what they started to notice is that oh man, the way we're standing, so the way we naturally organize ourselves in standing, the way that the body squats, which if you look at that like that spring concept, okay, think of the squat as the loading and think of your toe touch as the leaving. So this idea of movement, load, then transfer, which now moves you from point A to point B. In a static environment, when you're just twisting in place, going up and down from the ground, would be your everyday squat and your everyday toe touch. So what they noticed was the way somebody is standing in front of me, the way they're organizing their bone structure in their standing, the way they organize their bone structure in their squat, the way they organize their bone structure in their hinge, ultimately leads to how they're going to move through space, right? How they're going to walk, jog, run, cut, juke, jump, do everything that they do. Essentially, what we're saying is your posture is sort of your behavior of movement. It's not a static thing necessarily. You could maybe look at it that way from the starting point of standing, but as you start to get a little more dynamic with twisting in place in a squat, you eventually keep that same posture in your walk and your run. So the everyday interaction between movement and rest really puts you around a very specific group of movements. How you're standing, how you're squatting, how you're hinging, how you're, almost getting to one knee. How do you go up and down from the ground? Because the next piece is, how do you rest? So as we go back to Philip Beach to kind of tie it all together, his thought process is movement and rest, and this is his quote, not mine, movement and rest are flip sides of the same coin. They imply each other. So if you're not moving, you're resting. What he's proposing is that the resting shapes are meant to keep the following or subsequent movement tuned up and ready to go. So where Goata wants everybody to start is by reclaiming these ground resting positions. And much like we already went through this phase or these developmental milestones as children, we're going to rekindle that and go through it again. So we're going to work all fours to single leg again, but now we've got a blueprint. We've got the global laws. We can have a discussion. Like I tell our level 1 coaches, there's a 3-tier or 3 phases to this. 1, awareness. Okay. You need to know what good and bad are. Okay. If you have a dog, if you have a puppy or a kid, what are you trying to do? Trying to make them aware of bad, good. And you confirm that consistently with your intentions, right? The way that you handle situations. So we want awareness on good and bad movement so that we can then develop intention around our movement, which then allows us to execute at a higher level. Now, your pattern, your body, the way it organizes, it might be stubborn right now because our behavior eventually goes to a place of locked in and has a feel of stubborn. But it is a malleable system, okay? So it can change. When you're younger, it changes sooner. When you're older, you got probably more injuries and a little more stubborn of a system, so it'll change a little bit slower. But that's why we use the all fours to single leg approach, because as we famously say, maybe it's famous, maybe someday it will be, Deb, spoon feed, don't waterboard your system, right? Because you've got to appreciate how many old injuries have you had? What's the chronic pain that you're dealing with right now? To put it simply, let's look at another medium, nutrition. Okay, I want to lose weight. All right, well, you're not just going to eat 3 square meals on a Monday and wake up 30 pounds less. You can't do that. It's not how it works. Oh, you want to build your bicep muscle because you just watched Pumping Iron with Schwarzenegger. That's great, but you can't go in there on a Monday, superset the biceps, and wake up Tuesday with his arm. You've got to be disciplined every single day and slowly, incrementally bring it back online. So what we're saying with Goata is let's put more points of contact in the ground. Let's focus on 2 things alone, which then can expand into a further discussion. 1 is alignment of the skeletal structure. 2 is your pressure, your body weight. Let's focus on those 2 things. How are you aligning around pressure? We'll give you more points of contact. I'm going to start with your hands and your knees and your feet on the ground, because if you've got more points, it's easier to align your skeleton and pressurize the right spots. As we get stronger in all fours, well, we just take points of contact away, and eventually get you up to standing. Now, like a symphony playing, and I'll finish with this, we want all the instruments to eventually come together and blend nicely to where it sounds beautiful. But if you're the maestro, you've got to start one group of instruments first, get them nice and tuned and where you want them, keep them playing, and then go to the next group of instruments and keep them, now get them integrated. Then go to the third group of instruments and get them going. And the way that I would simplify that in movement is groundwork on the ground is the first set of instruments that you have to get playing. So we've got to get comfortable there. If you're not comfortable with more pivot points, you're certainly not going to be comfortable with less pivot points. So let's get you comfortable on the ground. Then let's work you to 2 pivot points. So let's make sure you're comfortable with 2 legs, movement there in a bilateral setting. Then finally, let's challenge you with a single leg, which is kind of our rock star, if you will, right? That's the lead guitarist. Like that's eventually what we got to get to, but we need to keep him there for the encore. So we'll come in, we'll put all that together. That's the Goata system. All 4 is a single leg, groundwork, double leg, single leg, eventually all working together to take care of how you stand, how you squat, how you hinge, how you rest, because we know movement, running too fast, can't change the brain pattern there, but I can get it here in the pre-movement, and that's what we do. We recode pre-movement so that you can then go point A to point B in a healthier, more organized way.
So much there. I'm going to touch on a few of the things you said. One phrase that you also talked a lot about in our class was, it's the direction you're going, not the speed. So getting just this idea at all, what direction is worth going into? Because I know for a while I was part of that, just move more. Everything will work out if you just move more. Well, when the nervous system
you and me both.
When the nervous system is in a state of stress, you're just going to enhance your stressed habits. So this idea of spoon feeding, not waterboarding, going back to the ground, and then, you know, once I made my rounds around PRI, sort of Training Posture Restoration Institute, and then, you know, I did a bunch of different research while my joint instability was really killing me. And I had learned, foot pressure and eye gaze and breath are 3 of the ways that you can neurologically affect change. And you really can't affect deep change in any kind of state of stress. So me balancing on one leg wildly trying to do new tricks was just making me more of who I was. So, and the other thing is the nervous system and the synovial fluid and everything resets. I've been learning resets every 8 hours. I've been studying a little bit of work from Scoliosis Gym, and they've taken the world's worst case of scoliosis, like she's a U, and within a couple of months got her like 45 degrees. Like people are taking cerebral palsy cases and they're using these, you know, this idea that you're interrupting the existing pattern several times a day. And it's not even rocket science. It's simple things that have to do with breath and smart positions. So this idea that it could actually be easier than people think, if you brush your teeth twice a day, or maybe 3 times a day, depending upon how much sticky food. And even though we know the answer isn't just brushing your teeth. And that leads me to this idea that exercise is the solution. No, exercise is the Band-Aid to the movement lifestyle problem that we're facing. And just that's ever repeating fractal. That's, you know, I would look at the groundwork and be skeptical. I would look at the running and think, I can just copy that guide. No, you actually have to go through the steps. And the nice thing about Goata is you can tell, well, you're ready for this next step, but there aren't that many steps. It's something like eight steps, but they're fractals of each other. They're these ever repeating harmonious proportions. And, you know, the dancer in me that was doing things for attention, my fancy tricks, I never had this idea of my head is just far enough over this leg to put my pressure here. I was always like, I need to, you know, do something that people see. And so this idea that they're actually quite modest. The movements are quite
the precision,
modest,
the details,
precise, and the direction of my eyes and my nose. So it is really important with this practice to have a mirror or video or a coach. And yet remotely, I was able to learn so much from your class. You have so much great material. And like you said, the first thing is just seeing it. One thing I invite the audience to do is start to look around you and see how close or far apart people's feet are when they're standing,
Hmm.
and start noticing the angle of the feet. And you'll start to then, maybe it'll be possible for you to see what we mean by the inside ankle bone being low. You'll just start to see symptoms everywhere of this native pressure that's designed for movement has been interfered with the way that we're sticking our bodies against chairs, and we're keeping at chair height, and we're wearing these like you and Philip Beach call them foot coffins or something, like sensory deprivation chambers.
Yeah,
No,
I've copied that from others. I can't claim that one, but it
and
makes perfect sense, right? Sensory deprivation chambers are kind of what's going on at the foot level.
one thing he had prescribed in his book was 20 minutes a day, even making like a little personal rock garden, and 20 minutes a
Yeah,
day of just walking. I get golf balls out and I just do
sure.
a lot of myofascial release. So it's super exciting. And the last thing, okay,
Hmm.
I just want to, um, as my body started to change, and I'm looking at my running every day, and I look at it in slow motion. I look at it from the side. I barely run. People think, oh, you're running miles. No, I'm just doing my light little sprint because I
Yeah,
want it to be in my design. I want it to be building towards what I want to do. At the same time, I'm presented with all these choices now of what to do for movement. And I went to a
sure.
class where it was very athletic, very cardio, and I was like, wow, I'm not I'm not prepared for this. And then part of me wondered, well, do I even need to do this? Have you gotten more
Hmm.
selective about feeding your design? This, because I'm really pretty good with my daily routines. I'm pretty good with my and rest. You can log hours a day sitting. So if you
Yes.
you do 20 minutes here or there of some kind of floor-based lifestyle, whether it's even
Yep.
laying on your back with your knees up on a couch, is a healthier thing than sitting in a chair. So honestly, the idea of shifting your everyday resting positions is really one of the most powerful things here.
Oh
But
yeah.
then, as
Huge.
an athlete who wants to move joyfully and also resiliently, are there certain things you don't do anymore, or that you're not attracted to, or that you are attracted to?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great framing and it's great perspective. As I mentioned in the beginning of this chat, my father was a big workout guy, like worked out all the time. We had a gym in our house. Like we did, he had every single book. So I grew up in that. Like I did it all. I've done all the different, sort of lifts and I went to Iowa. It was all powerlifting based. I've done more hang cleans than I could ever imagine. So I've seen everything, right? In the sense of what's kind of out there. I've done everything and I know pretty well how my body's reacted to each different stimulus. Once I saw inner ankle bone high, once I saw like, which was so fascinating to me, my favorite athletes were naturally the Goatas, not knowing it at the time. Like Michael Jordan is the GOAT of sports to me. Tom Brady, Randy Moss, Ed Reed, Allen Iverson. Like these are literally the guys that I grew up idolizing. They're all Goatas. So once I saw it like a little kid, I was like, that's all I want. I just want to move like a Goata. Like I really was at that point in so much pain that I had known that it wasn't fixing me. I wasn't any faster. I was at my fastest when I lifted the least in my life. I jumped the highest. So I knew that there wasn't this like direct correlation to lift more, run faster. So all of that stuff at the end of the day, when you're sitting there 26, 27 years old, and your body's breaking down if you go to run, you start to simplify. So my approach nowadays is, and this is my philosophy, and I think that you can adopt it in this way with our GOATA system because of what we've done in the performance side as well, the strength and conditioning side. I think you start on the ground. I think you return to the ground and you walk, jog, run, cut, juke, jump, throw, swing, strike in between. So what that means is you change first and foremost the resting, because I don't care what you do in your life or where you sit as far as workouts. And I want more people. I don't want to be combative with other systems. It's just
Yeah,
not
yeah,
healthy. It
yeah.
doesn't help anybody. It deters the listener. They start to dislike the people that run the system, and then they're kind of sitting there. Well, like I'd love to work with this system, but now I don't like. So it's not healthy for anybody. So what I always say is, where's the olive branch? What can we all kind of agree on, or what can we all start to implement? And I think that the resting positions, there's such a saturation to the time that we are sitting in our rest position that we can really affect change. I want to bring to your attention that you are affecting change in your rest. And if I can get you to the ground and get you more comfortable and you can add that to your life, I believe you're going to feel great. It's what I hear all the time from our level 1 students, is that how much different they feel in just 3 weeks and how they're never going to go back to the chair the same way that they did. Obviously, we got to have our cake and eat it too. We got to be realistic. We're never going to not sit in a chair. Goata's not saying you got to ditch your shoes and live in a teepee. We're literally saying, let's have our cake and eat it too. We can exploit this new knowledge. So the ground rest is what I would recommend to everybody. I'm literally sitting at my floor desk. I teach every level 1 and level 2, as you know. I'm doing all my work on the floor. I rarely sit in a chair. I only do it when I have to. The next piece is play. Yeah, go ahead.
Play. Go ahead with play, please.
Play to me is centered in that world of kind of what we naturally do. Walk, jog, run, cut, juke, jump, throw, swing, strike. So you mentioned the dance, and there's so much of what can we do versus what should we do or what we're meant to do. And I think that's, as I talked to you guys in level 2, when you remove the cupboard and you remove the processed food and you remove the refrigerator and now you have to go get your food, wow, the day just got a lot simpler, right? Like that's what was, Gilly's approach when he was looking at the indigenous. And what I noticed, and another way to go look at their lifestyle, is a YouTube channel called New Atlantis Tribes. And you can really see that, like the other animals, the whole day centered around getting the food, because that's just part of the life. When you don't have the way to preserve your food, you're constantly in a pursuit of the hunt and the gather, because that's what we are skilled at. We get together as a group, we gather, we hunt. So when you look at life through that lens, well, it got really simple. It's resting when I'm not going to hunt. And if you look at the gathering, that's the up and down from the ground, which gives you the squat, the hinge, or the dropping to one knee, which is really a drop in, your way to go from standing to the ground. And then you look at the hunt as the jog, the run, potentially a cut or a juke, a multiplanar sort of turning type of movement, and then into the eventual throw, swing, and strike. So I think if you're in that world, you're generally soothing that sort of natural play element that's so important to the body. And there's a lot of cool ways that you can cultivate that. For me, what I always loved and what I eventually missed the most was running. So once I could get the run back, that's what I do every single morning. It's the first thing I do. I wake up, throw on my Ultra running shoes. That's not a plug. I just really like the shoe. I don't get anything back for that. But Ultra running shoes allow me to run with these qualities of the foot playing out the right way. And I go. I run at least a mile every single morning. And now I can. Before I couldn't. My left hip would not allow me. So it wasn't fun. I didn't enjoy it. And I really didn't do anything for a while. I couldn't lift. Told you that killed me. Couldn't run. That already was beating me up. So once I was able to restore with these ground positions, I made that a part of my life, getting to the ground, returning to it, starting at it. And then in between, I love to run. I love to play golf. I coach football. So I find myself running around with the kids and throwing the football with them and just in general staying active. But what really makes me feel like agile, hostile, ready to go is that I'm resting on the ground. Because I know now I can see the difference, the contrast of when I rest on a chair, I get up and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I got to do a whole routine to get ready to move again. When I rest on the ground, I pop up and I'm like, let's go, right? It's kind of like how the kids probably feel. And then ultimately with the indigenous, like you go watch New Atlantis videos, watch the Hadza, watch the Karubo, watch all the elders and the youngins and the in-betweens get ready to go for their hunt. They don't do a foam rolling session, right? They don't do a band activation series, or nothing against those, but I'm just saying that the value of resting well can really give you this feeling of youthful elasticity again. So I generally keep it simple. Like I said, start on the ground, return to the ground, and do something in that natural setting of walk, jog, run, cut, juke, jump, throw, swing, strike in between. And for me, it's the jog or hitting golf balls. Those are the two things I love to do.
I love it. And to add to that, like last week, my guest was Frank Forencich, who was an evolutionary biologist who talks really about how to use play to to connect to each other in that tribal sense.
Sure.
And West African dance, what I love is we're connecting to the music and each other, and the shapes are very
Sure.
very stacked, and there's a lot of this you spiraling in and out of the ground when you get this feeling of
A little
flying.
bouncy. Yeah. You get
Bouncy.
elasticity back.
And
Right.
yet, the chair sitting adds up. And I will just say one other thing about chair sitting, because I've been studying this chair issue for
Hmm.
30 years, 27, 30 years. I don't know. So
Yeah.
when I first started with Gene Couch, and I had was a yoga survivor after wrecking myself teaching 15
Yoga
times a week.
survivor.
Yeah, that's I
Yeah.
have a
Right. Kind of
URL.
feels like that.
Yeah, well, after being hypermobile and jacking my hips with all these back bends, which
Right.
is really going against our design. There's very limited functional back bends in terms of evolutionary biology. But what I
Right.
was going to say is we don't even notice our chairs have these little, especially the ones that swivel. You get
Yeah.
just a little enough of a turn so that right hand can use your mouse, and then you're there long enough, and maybe even part of you starts to lean. I have to say this asymmetry too of this thing.
Oh.
Whoa, whoa. So I'm starting to lay flat on my back and just get like
Hmm.
one part of Goata. There is the linear part of Goata is just getting these columns aligned so that we can
Yeah. Your
easily
90
move.
degree angles. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can easily move the pressure back and forth between the columns,
Right.
and just our chairs driving with that one foot are so all of us need movement hygiene and these
Hmm.
pathways to feeling better. And all right, well, so to find you, gotamovement.com, right?
Yep. Yep.
And
Go
how
to
do people?
movement.com will give you the chance to kind of, I've been saying level one a lot. I would, and I'm sure Deb would back me up on this. That's where I want and then would recommend everybody to start. It's a 3-week masterclass where all these concepts that we've been laying out, maybe you're like, this sounds great. You're probably also like, I have no idea what he's talking about. Rest assured, these podcasts are not meant to, in our Instagram page, is not meant to necessarily educate you. And we understand that. And we want to show a sign of good faith that there's legitimately, legitimate, it's legitimate if you go and look at the evidence. So we want to provide an environment for you when you hear a podcast like this and it challenges a lot of the status quo, or you look at our page and it challenges the status quo. What we've done is we've built a 2-part education series, 2 courses that are all online. So, and they're built for coaches and athletes, general pop. They're really built for anybody. They'll definitely help you as a coach. So we kind of tilted towards that. But the idea is to break this down in a very digestible way where you can start to change yourself. In the first course, level 1, we'll give it to you for free. So it's a
Free.
3-week masterclass for free. You can join us. And then you can go ahead and decide if you want to keep going or just kind of use what you have in front of you. And I promise you what you'll have in front of you will really help you understand the resting side of this, right? This idea of resting on the ground, and you're going to get yourself out of pain, and you'll be able to find all that stuff on our Goata Movement website. So gotamovement.com. If you want to look at us on social, I would go to Instagram. I would type in Goata_movement. And that should, be one of the first things that pops up. And you can find us in the links to level 1 through there as well.
Yeah, an incredible value. I know that you guys used to charge $500 for that class. And when you're done with that, you could lead other people through getting
Yeah.
them out of their base
You can help
level
your
of
clients,
pain.
your
Yeah.
friends, your family. Yep.
Even if they can't easily get to the ground, a lot of people can do the movement in their bed.
Yeah.
There really isn't any.
Yeah.
And the biggest challenge is you really do need. I get resistance. People saying, "I don't want any more theory, Deb. You're not you talk too much."
Yeah.
And that's one reason I offloaded a lot of this to podcasts, is I can just direct
Sure.
students, like just go there, so we don't have to talk about it in class, and I can mostly correct your alignment while we're
Right.
together. And yet you have to know enough. Back in the 70s, everybody knew how to fix their own cars. We've
Yeah.
outsourced
That's a good point. Yeah.
this user manual of the body
Right.
to people who have no incentive to get us better. And
Sure.
the cost to the tribe of all these orthopedic surgeries, and the months and months it takes to recover, and the months it takes to get the coverage, the impact on your families, like if there's something, and yet you will need to know for yourself so that you will be able to commit to something that looks so simple, you won't think it works, because you have started to believe that the inventions of mankind are more powerful than what we were given at birth. We've started to believe
Sure.
against our design. So you're going to have to know what your design is so that you can stick with it, even when some well-meaning chiropractor tells you one leg is longer than the other. You actually need enough. And the beautiful thing,
We need
Ricky, about
context around that. Yeah, you need
context.
context.
And the beautiful thing about the way you've done the level 1 is you have like 5 minutes a day of videos that are theory you watch.
Right.
You're doing your 5 minutes a day of exercises. And I can't tell you how many people will not do their 5 minutes a day of exercise.
I didn't say it would be easy, and that's what I'm thinking, right? I'm not offering you a pill. I am not offering you a pill. You will need to work for this. But that's what in your lives, for the listeners, has ever come easy that was really worth it, right? So think, and look, this is your life. These are your knees. This is your back. So you got to be active with your stuff. I think so much of what we want is, like you mentioned earlier with the spoon feed, right? It's Amazon.com. I love it. But the idea of the one click, right? I click one button and boom, it's right there. We've now taken that to everything. And look, yeah, you're in a position where, and I'll say it this way, we talk about a recode because we want to rewire the way your body is organized. We want to change your behavior. We want to transform you. The idea of the recode is to not have to recode. So what I mean by that is I'm going to show you how this is just naturally woven into your lifestyle. And if you can get it to that, like I said before, I'm maintaining this stuff as I'm answering emails. So I don't need to go do an hour gym session to make myself feel good. I wake up feeling good. I can run every single day. I run with our high school team. I run around my neighborhood. There's no prep work for that. I literally put on the shoes and go. So you don't have to have this extreme time commitment in the long run. Now, early on, you're going to need to rack your brain a little bit and understand this. A simple analogy for this is you're standing at the edge of a forest. You got your dirt bike and you're like, man, I'd love to just fly through some trails. Okay, well, you can't right now because there's a bunch of thicket. There's a bunch of trees in the way, but you get your machete, you get your chainsaw, and slowly but surely you start to carve a little bit of path. And eventually that path is worn down and it's so easy to see and it's so much fun because you can go fast. Well, that's how your brain's going to rewire. It's going to set up to this Goata knowledge and it's going to go, whoa, I've got a lot of weeds and thickets and trees in the way. I've got some disturbing patterns that aren't quite organized. Okay, well, let's start untying this knot that we have slowly, and eventually we'll clear some space. And eventually that path is like, man, I can't believe I was ever crooked foot collapsed. And I'll be the first to tell you because that's how I was. From where I am today, and Deb can back us up with the same concept, you change yourself. You transform yourself. This isn't one of those when you let it go, situations or you got to keep doing it. It's built into your daily life. You're just hanging out on the ground and you're getting that time back. So you change your resting positions, you change the way you're standing, you squat better. Guess what? You're standing every single day. You're walking thousands of reps. You're squatting and you're toe touching. You don't even realize that you're doing it in a way that's integrated, and then you rest. So if I get you to walk like a Goata, there's thousands of reps that are subconsciously going to always maintenance you. I get you to stand like a Goata. There's more time under tension. You squat and you hinge. You keep the oiling of the hips and the ankles along with the resting. So there's a way to do this that eventually requires very little time. It's just you got to be disciplined at the front end and you got to learn how to spoon feed and not waterboard. And that's something with this system that I always loved was that, man, that is so natural because like the baby and the indigenous, they want to play, they want to go. And we want that for you, the listener, as well. So whatever it is that you love, okay, you may think that some of the stuff we're saying challenges it, weightlifting, this or that. I extend an olive branch to you. Join us in level 1, listen to and see the information for yourself. If you love it and you want to keep continuing, you can. If you love it and you just want to stop right there, perfect. But at least at least you took a look at it. Doesn't require much time. And I think it'll really transform the way you're looking at your body and movement.
And I wanted to put one more explanation in, which is you have level 2 coaches, which is a level 2 coach can get you past the ground and to those
Yes.
more take you
They're your
further
guide.
into, yeah, further
They're a guide.
and whether it's you're even having problems getting to the ground, or you don't know how to modify things so they feel good,
Right.
or you just really want to get all the way to you can heavily load something and do a plyometric one leg first, because that's the one thing I'm explaining as my students are having success with the groundwork. I didn't properly tell them, like, oh, but if you want to head closer Michael Jordan direction,
Yes,
we're gonna
it's a good way to
add
put
some
it.
more
We need a little bit
positive
more.
stressors. Yeah. Although I'm happy being a MODA. Instead of a greatest of all time action or worst of all time action, which is WODA, I'm a MODA. Kind of like mediocre of all time
Mediocre.
action.
We used to call that. So we had a name for that, Deb. You'll love it. We used to call it BODA. So blended. We would say you're kind of, it's blended. So we say it's kind of a BODA. You're like, you're somewhere in between. But that's to say, like, look, you can have a binary and also have a spectrum. So I think people get caught up in like one or the other. You can say that there's good and there's bad. And then you can say, well, that's like really good behavior. And that's like, that's kind of bad, but it's not as bad as this. So there's a spectrum to the behavior. What we want for you is acknowledge where you're at. And as long as you're taking steps and you're moving the needle towards a more decompressed state, it's very similar to somebody that, let's use the nutrition again, they're looking to lose weight. Okay, well, let's say the first week that they go about actually eating good meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, the weight didn't just disappear, but I guarantee you they feel better. Their quality of life is better. That's the idea with movement. Even if you're not necessarily running around like Randy Moss, but you're sort of reenacting those behaviors, that old back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, knee pain, what if that's out of your life? What if that's not something that's bothering you? How much better is your day to day? That's the concept with Goata.
And to finish on that note, sustainability. A lot of these things, going to the acupuncturist every week, and then the craniosacral person, and then you end up in the surgery, and then you get the fancy chair and the fancy pillow, the fancy shoes, and none of it is working at the holistic design. And one other thing I want to say is a lot of our culture too has become very frontal ever since mass media and the first models in France started jutting their hips forward. Mass-produced chairs and with the plastic started to tuck the pelvis. So this modern problem requires a solution that actually is not frontal. What's happening is we're taking this frontal culture and we're putting a frontal paradigm on. Oh, let's get the six-pack abs. Let's get the front tight. Let's get the front this way. Let's get the front tall. When 2/3 of the muscle being on the back of our body, when that starts to decompress and become able to extend fully, then it can contract fully. I can now go on my little chucks from a pretty nice squat to just jumping straight up out of it, because, and yet I wouldn't have believed that at all. I wouldn't have, because of the evidence from the front was like, well, nothing's really changed here. But if we start this war, like the front has to get tighter when the back's already tight, or the glutes that are already over pinched just keep pinching more. So we're really talking about this freedom and elongation and decompression, and taking the time and feeling the enjoyment of ourselves in these ever repeating, simple proportions.
Yes, spirals.
Okay, well,
curves.
You're a genius. Thank you so much. That's Ricky Stanzi, GoataMovement.com, or Goata, did you say _?
Yep, Goata_movement.
Movement on Instagram. Beautiful content and lots of free content too on YouTube, but I really recommend the level 1 class. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Ricky.